And in 10 years, Marine sached, or was carrying the ardor wisdom of someone who had spent decades navigating political treachery. Can you control our strategic sectors? When our companies have become your subsidiaries? When French workers depend on Chinese managers for their livelihoods? Xi's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect for her ability to see beyond immediate benefits to long-term consequences. This was why she had survived 3 presidential campaigns, while more established politicians had fallen by the wayside. In 10 years, you'll be president of the French Republic, he replied smoothly, recognized as the leader who restored national pride and economic sovereignty. Isn't that exactly what you've always wanted? Isn't that why you've spent your entire political career fighting the established order? The psychological pressure was expertly applied. Xi understood that Marine's deepest motivation wasn't personal ambition, but genuine belief that she could save France from decline. By framing his proposal as patriotic duty rather than personal betrayal, he was appealing to the very core of her political identity. Xi gathered his tablet and moved toward the lounge exit, but paused at the threshold like an actor delivering his final lines. The timing was perfect, calculated to leave Marine with maximum psychological pressure and minimum time for rational analysis. "Oh, there's one additional detail I should mention," he said, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing minor administrative matters. "We have some interesting information about your party's financing arrangements. Russian loans, I believe? It would be unfortunate if those documents found their way to investigative journalists before the election campaign intensifies." The threat was delivered with such elegant understatement that it took a moment for its full implications to register. Xi wasn't simply offering a deal. He was conducting sophisticated blackmail using information that could destroy Marine's political career if released at the wrong moment. Marine remained frozen in place as the lounge door closed behind Xi and his security detail, the soft click echoing like a trap snapping shut. She was alone again with the storm raging outside and chaos erupting inside her mind. The proposal represented everything she claimed to oppose: foreign influence over French politics, surrender of national sovereignty, the kind of Faustian bargain that had corrupted so many political movements throughout history. But it also offered everything she had promised her supporters: economic renewal, employment creation, industrial revival, the restoration of French greatness on the global stage. The contradiction was maddening. She moved back to the window, watching snowflakes spiral through the darkness like her own thoughts trapped in an endless loop. Outside, airport crews continued their futile battle against the storm, but inside her mind, a different kind of weather system was forming, one that would determine not just her political future, but the destiny of the nation she claimed to serve. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Jordan Bardella, her successor as party leader. "Marine, heard about the flight delays. Everything okay there?" She stared at the message for long minutes before responding. How could she explain that she had just been offered the keys to the kingdom by the one power that represented everything her movement theoretically opposed? How could she admit that she was actually considering a proposition that would transform her from France's defender into its betrayer? "Just weather problems," she typed back, the banality of the words mocking the magnitude of what she was actually facing. "Be home soon." But as she sent the message, Marine knew that the woman who would board that delayed flight to Paris would be fundamentally different from the one who had arrived from Rome hours earlier. Xi Jinping had planted seeds of possibility and doubt that would grow in the darkness of the coming weeks, reshaping everything she thought she knew about leadership, loyalty, and the price of power in the modern world. "Don't dare compare pour legitimate concerns with your dictatorship," Marine shot back, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. The suggestion that her defense of French culture was equivalent to Chinese oppression struck at the core of everything she believed about democracy and human rights. "Protecting French identity has nothing to do with your concentration camps. We're a democracy. You run a totalitarian regime." She smiled with evident satisfaction at having provoked such a strong reaction. This was exactly the emotional response he had been orchestrating, the moment when careful diplomatic language gave way to raw honesty. "Democracy?" he mused, his tone almost philosophical. "You want to leave the European Union, control media narrative, restrict immigration? That's precisely our program, Madame Le Pen. We simply had the courage to implement it fully rather than hiding behind parliamentary procedures." He swiped through more images on his tablet, revealing footage that made Marine's stomach clench with recognition: riots in French suburbs, violent protests, burning cars, scenes of social chaos that had become tragically familiar across France. "Look at your country," he continued with clinical detachment. "Suburbs burning, demonstrations turning violent, insecurity growing like a cancer. What do you propose? More police, more surveillance, more control. Exactly like us, but with the pretense of democratic legitimacy." Marine could feel the trap closing around her with each word. Every argument she advanced was being twisted, perverted, turned into ammunition for his psychological assault. "We propose direct democracy, referendums, genuine citizen participation," she said, struggling to regain the initiative. "You propose single-party dictatorship wrapped in nationalist rhetoric." "Dictatorship?" She erupted in genuine laughter this time, a sound that echoed off the lounge's polished surfaces. We've lifted 800 million Chinese out of poverty. We've built the world's second largest economy from nothing. Our citizens are prosperous, secure, proud of their nation's achievements. Meanwhile, your European Democrats accumulate failure after failure. Unemployment, uncontrolled immigration, terrorism, industrial decline. He paused, letting each word settle like stones in still water. Perhaps your father was right about one thing. Western democracy is a weak system, indecisive, incapable of protecting its own people from internal decay. This second mention of Jean-Marie Le Pen sent Marine to her feet again, her chair scraping against the polished floor. The wound was still raw despite years of trying to escape her father's shadow, to prove that she could build something better than his legacy of division and hatred. My father was a man of the past, she declared, her voice carrying the weight of years of internal struggle. I represent France's future, a future where we'll be neither submissive to America nor to China, but truly independent. The future. Xi rose as well, his considerable height allowing him to tower over Marine's slender frame. The physical intimidation was subtle, but unmistakable, the body language of someone accustomed to dominating every space he entered. The future is us, Madame Le Pen. In 20 years, China will be the world's dominant power. Your French companies already work for us. Your students learn Mandarin. Your politicians come begging for our investments, like supplicants at an emperor's court. He moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the storm that continued to rage across the airport. Snow swirled in hypnotic patterns against the glass, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. Look at this snow, he said, his voice taking on an almost poetic quality. It falls on every roof without discrimination, covers every surface equally. That's exactly what will happen with Chinese influence. It will blanket the world whether you desire it or not, whether you resist it or embrace it. Marine joined him at the window, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. Snow melts in spring, she said softly, her voice carrying a note of defiance despite the intimate tone. Like all empires, yours will eventually collapse. History teaches us that much. Perhaps, she acknowledged with surprising candor. But until that day comes, you and I will be long gone. Your children, your grandchildren will live in a Chinese world unless, his sentence hung unfinished, creating a silence pregnant with implications that would reshape everything. Marine thought she knew about power, compromise, and survival in the 21st century.
This isn't fear. It's historical awareness, Marine replied, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had spent decades studying the rise and fall of empires. She could feel the traps he was laying, but she also recognized the intellectual challenge he represented. This wasn't some Brussels bureaucrat she could dismiss with populist rhetoric. We won't repeat the West's mistakes. First comes trade, then influence, finally occupation. The same pattern we applied in Africa that you're now reproducing on a global scale. Xi's laugh was precisely calibrated, warm enough to seem genuine, cold enough to carry menace. You sound exactly like your father. Jean-Marie had these same irrational fears of foreign influence. He saw conspiracies everywhere, imagined invasions that existed only in his mind. You've inherited his paranoia, along with his political movement. Marine's face hardened instantly, her jaw clenching as every muscle in her body tensed. Mentioning Jean-Marie Le Pen was crossing a line. Xi knew perfectly well he was crossing. Chinese intelligence had thoroughly documented the painful family dynamics, the ideological struggles, the bitter public break between father and daughter that had nearly destroyed her political career. Leave my father out of this conversation, she said, each word delivered with surgical precision, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. We're discussing the present, not fighting ghosts from the past. And the present is your aggressive expansion into European economies, while our leaders smile and applaud. But the past illuminates the present, Xi continued, savoring each word like fine wine. He was enjoying this psychological warfare, the careful application of pressure designed to crack her composure. Your party has always struggled with global engagement. Perhaps that's why you never achieve real power. The French people sense your intellectual limitations, your fear of complexity. Marine rose abruptly from her chair, the leather creaking in protest as she stood to her full height. Even standing, she had to look up at Xi, but her posture radiated defiance rather than submission. 3 times a presidential candidate, 3 times in the final round. That's quite an achievement in a system where the entire establishment unites against us. 10 million French citizens voted for me in the second round of the last election. 3 times a loser, Xi corrected with brutal precision, remaining seated to emphasize his apparent detachment from her emotional response. Emmanuel Macron defeated you twice. Even he, a banker without a real political party, succeeded where you continue to fail. That's revealing about your limitations, don't you think? The barb hit home with painful accuracy. Marine felt a surge of rage building in her chest, but decades of political discipline helped her regain control. This was exactly what he wanted, to destabilize her, to make her react emotionally rather than strategically. She took a deliberate breath and settled back into her chair, crossing her legs with studied elegance. President Xi, she said, her voice once again measured and controlled. You understand perfectly that our electoral system favors the mushy center, but the ideas I represent are advancing. Brexit trumps election, the rise of populist movements across Europe. The tide is turning in our favor. Xi touched the surface of his tablet, causing charts and graphs to illuminate the screen. He rotated it toward Marine, the data glowing in the ambient light like a technological crystal ball. Let's discuss these advancing ideas of yours. Your positions on immigration, on Islam, on globalization. Do you realize we share many of these concerns in China? We also control our borders. We also preserve our cultural identity against foreign influence. Marine frowned, sensing a shift in the conversation's direction. Where was this leading? We've built the world's most sophisticated surveillance system, Xi continued, his tone becoming almost conversational. We monitor our Uyghur citizens, exactly as you would like to monitor your Muslim population. We have re-education facilities to preserve social harmony. Isn't that essentially what you propose, beneath the democratic rhetoric? The implication was clear and deeply disturbing. Xi was attempting to associate her legitimate concerns about French identity with the worst excesses of Chinese totalitarianism.
Unless we work together, Xi finally completed his thought, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. The change in tone transformed the entire atmosphere of the encounter, shifting from confrontation to something that felt almost like seduction. I have a proposition for you, Madame Le Pen, something that could fundamentally alter France's destiny. Marine felt her heartbeat quicken despite every instinct screaming warnings. This was the moment she had sensed building throughout their conversation, the reveal of whatever agenda had brought Xi Jinping to seek her out in this storm-bound airport lounge. What kind of proposition? Xi returned to the table and retrieved his tablet, his movements deliberate as he accessed files marked with the highest levels of Chinese state security classification. The screen illuminated with documents that immediately captured Marine's attention, detailed intelligence assessments, economic projections, political analyses that revealed the depth of Chinese surveillance of European politics. "We know you're going to win the next election," he stated with the confidence of someone reading from established fact rather than offering speculation. "Our analytical departments are quite definitive about this. Popular anger in France has reached a tipping point. Macron won't seek re-election. The left remains fragmented. Traditional conservatism is politically dead. The mathematical certainty of your victory is undeniable." Marine tried to maintain her composure, but she could feel her pulse accelerating. The matter-of-fact way Xi discussed her political future was both thrilling and terrifying. "And what does that matter to China?" "Everything," Xi replied, swiping to reveal financial documents that made Marine's eyes widen. "We want to be your primary partners before you even take office, before other powers can establish their influence over your administration." The screen filled with astronomical figures, infrastructure investments, industrial partnerships, technological transfers, employment creation programs, 50 billion euro in direct investment, more money than any French government had seen since the Marshall Plan. Construction of manufacturing facilities, job creation in strategic sectors, modernization of your transportation networks, Xi enumerated, each promise designed to address France's most pressing economic vulnerabilities. All of this could begin immediately upon your electoral victory. In exchange for, the pause was theatrical, perfectly timed to maximize psychological impact. Marine found herself leaning forward despite her better judgment, drawn into the web Xi was weaving with masterful precision. In exchange for what, she asked, though every instinct warned her that she was walking into a carefully prepared trap. "Your neutrality regarding our Taiwan situation," Xi said with casual precision, as if discussing weather patterns, "and your support for France's withdrawal from NATO's military command structure. Nothing more complicated than implementing the foreign policy you've already advocated publicly." Marine stepped back as if physically struck. The audacity of the proposal was breathtaking. Xi was asking her to fundamentally realign France's strategic partnerships, to abandon decades of Western alliance in exchange for Chinese investment. "You're asking me to betray our allies," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm offering you the means to liberate your country," Xi corrected, his tone patient as if explaining basic economics to a child. "NATO serves American interests, not French ones. You've said this repeatedly in your speeches. We're simply providing the financial resources to make your political philosophy practical reality." The tablet screen now displayed architectural renderings and economic impact studies, new high-speed rail lines connecting French cities, modernized ports capable of handling massive Chinese cargo ships, research centers focused on artificial intelligence and renewable energy. Everything France needed to reclaim its position as a major global power. 50 billion euro, Xi repeated, letting the number hang in the air like incense. "More than all EU recovery programs combined. Your voters would celebrate you as the leader who restored French industrial greatness, who brought prosperity back to communities devastated by decades of deindustrialization." Marine stared at the projections, her mind racing through the implications.
The offer was diabolically tempting, addressing every economic vulnerability that had driven French voters toward populist alternatives, but she understood the real price of Chinese investment from observing other nations that had accepted similar deals.
The storm that struck Charles de Gaulle Airport that December night was unlike anything Paris had seen in decades. Ice crystals formed intricate patterns on the terminal windows, while the wind howled through the empty corridors with an almost supernatural intensity. Outside, snowplows fought a losing battle against drifts that buried aircraft and rendered the runways impassable. Inside Terminal Douai's VIP lounge, the silence was broken only by the soft hum of heating systems working overtime and the distant echo of cancelled flight announcements in 3 languages. Marine Le Pen sat alone in a corner of the luxurious waiting area, her platinum blonde hair catching the warm light from designer lamps as she hunched over her laptop. Her navy blue suit, perfectly tailored for the political meeting she had just concluded in Rome, now felt constraining after 12 hours of travel delays. She had removed her heels hours ago, her stockinged feet tucked under her chair as she studied polling data with the intensity of a general preparing for war. The European parliamentary elections were just months away, and every percentage point mattered. Her blue eyes, sharp with intelligence and years of political combat, scanned through demographic breakdowns from across France. The establishment media might dismiss her party as extremist, but the numbers told a different story. Working-class voters, rural communities, even segments of the middle class were gravitating toward her message of French independence and cultural preservation. She paused at a particularly encouraging poll from the industrial north, allowing herself a rare smile. The sound of the lounge door opening barely registered until she heard footsteps approaching with measured, deliberate precision, the kind of walk that belonged to someone accustomed to having others move aside. Marine looked up and felt her breath catch in her throat. Xi Jinping stood just a few meters away, his imposing frame filling the space like a force of nature. The Chinese president was impeccably dressed despite the travel chaos, his dark suit pressed to perfection, his silver hair combed with mathematical precision, but it was his eyes that commanded attention. Dark, calculating, holding the confidence of someone who governed over 1 billion people with absolute authority. Behind him, a small entourage of security personnel moved with silent efficiency, their eyes constantly scanning the room before Xi gestured for them to withdraw to a respectful distance. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet here they were, stranded by the same storm in this bubble of diplomatic luxury. Madame Le Pen, Xi said, his accented French carrying the weight of careful pronunciation, each syllable chosen with diplomatic precision. I have followed your political career with considerable interest. Marine slowly closed her laptop, her movements deliberate as she processed this unexpected encounter. Years of political survival had taught her that nothing involving figures like Xi Jinping was ever truly coincidental. She straightened in her chair, adopting the posture of defiance that had served her well through countless confrontational interviews. Coincidence, President Xi, she replied, her voice carrying the skepticism that had made her enemies in Brussels and Washington. Does the concept of chance exist in China, or is everything planned according to your famous 5-year strategies? A slight smile played at the corners of Xi's mouth, but it never reached his eyes. He gestured to the chair across from her, waiting for her subtle nod before settling his considerable frame into the leather seat. The action was courteous but commanding, the behavior of someone who was accustomed to having permission granted before it was even requested. Natural forces affect everyone equally, Xi observed, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced precision. Storms, earthquakes, pandemics, they make no distinction between nations or ideologies. Before nature's power, we are all vulnerable. Natural forces, yes, Marine replied, her gaze never wavering from his face. But political forces are different. There are people who try to control them, manipulate them according to their interests, and I believe you know something about that. Something shifted in Xi's expression, a flicker of what might have been approval or anticipation. This woman would not be easily intimidated, which made what he was about to propose all the more intriguing.
2 hours later, Marine Le Pen remained motionless in a leather chair, her untouched tea growing cold as she stared into the middle distance. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, but the tempest in her mind showed no signs of calming. Xi Jinping's proposition echoed through her thoughts like a song she couldn't escape, each repetition revealing new layers of complexity and consequence. The lounge door opened again, interrupting her paralysis. A uniformed airport official approached with the kind of apologetic deference reserved for VIP passengers who had been severely inconvenienced. Madame Le Pen, we've managed to clear one runway. Your flight to Paris will depart in 90 minutes. She nodded mechanically but made no move to gather her belongings. The official hesitated, clearly expecting some response, then quietly withdrew, leaving her alone with thoughts that felt too dangerous to think and too important to ignore. Her encrypted phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. You have 72 hours to consider our conversation. After that, Circumstances may change in ways that limit future opportunities. A friend who respects France's potential. Marine deleted the message immediately, but the countdown had begun. 72 hours to decide whether she would save France or sell it, whether she would become its greatest leader or its ultimate betrayer. The distinction seemed to shift with each heartbeat. She remembered her father's words from years before, spoken during one of their rare private moments before their final irreparable break. Politics, my daughter, is the art of choosing between evils. The skill lies in selecting the lesser one. But which was the lesser evil? Accepting Chinese partnership and risking national sovereignty? Or maintaining ideological purity while watching France continue its slow decline under American and European influence? Her phone rang. Jordan Bardella's name appeared on the screen, bringing her back to immediate reality. Marine, just wanted to confirm tomorrow's strategy meeting with the regional coordinators. She forced her voice to sound normal despite the chaos in her mind. Of course, nothing's changed. Actually, something interesting came up. Beijing Review wants to do a feature interview about your vision for Europe's future. Could be good international exposure. Interested? The speed of Chinese follow-up was breathtaking. Xi's organization was already implementing whatever plan he had prepared for her response, creating opportunities for deeper engagement while simultaneously applying subtle pressure. Let's discuss it tomorrow, she said, buying time she desperately needed. After ending the call, Marine walked to the window one final time. Paris remained invisible beneath its blanket of snow, but she could imagine the city sleeping peacefully, unaware that its future might have been decided in an airport lounge during the worst storm in decades. Her secure device chimed with another message. Madame Le Pen, we understand that our proposal requires careful consideration. Please find attached some additional materials that might inform your decision. The attached files contained everything Xi had promised and more. Detailed economic analyses, employment projections, infrastructure plans that would transform France into a modern industrial powerhouse. But buried among the technical documents was something else, a dossier on Emmanuel Macron containing information that even French intelligence services didn't possess. Offshore accounts, irregular campaign financing, connections to oligarchs across Eastern Europe. Enough material to destroy any political career, released at the right moment. The message was unmistakable. Chinese intelligence capabilities extended far beyond what European leaders imagined, and they were willing to use that power to protect their investments in cooperative politicians. 20 minutes later, Marine finally gathered her belongings and headed toward the departure gate. Her flight to Paris was boarding, but the journey ahead involved far more than crossing French airspace. She was traveling toward a decision that would define not just her political legacy, but the fundamental character of the nation she claimed to love. As she settled into her first-class seat, watching the lights of Charles de Gaulle Airport fade into the snowy darkness, Marine Le Pen understood that she had been irrevocably changed by her encounter with Xi Jinping. The woman who landed in Paris in 3 hours would carry secrets and possibilities that would reshape everything she thought she knew about power, principle, and the price of national greatness. History would perhaps record that stormy December night as the moment when France's destiny shifted toward the East, not through conquest or coercion, but through the simple recognition that survival in the 21st century required choosing one's dependencies, rather than having them imposed by others. The question was no longer whether France would be influenced by global powers, but which powers would shape its future, and at what cost.
Xi reached into his jacket's inner pocket and withdrew a slim tablet, the gesture so casual it seemed almost incidental. But Marine recognized the calculated nature of every movement from someone at his level of power. He placed the device on the glass coffee table between them, its black surface reflecting the lounge's ambient lighting like a dark mirror. It's time to establish solid connections between France and China, Xi began, his voice taking on the tone of someone used to being listened to without interruption. A uniformed server had appeared silently, setting down a service of fine porcelain teacups and a steaming pot that filled the air with the scent of jasmine. The contrast between the delicate ritual and the weight of their conversation was almost surreal. Europe's future lies not across the Atlantic, but along the Silk Road. Your continent needs new partners, fresh perspectives. Marine lifted her teacup with practiced elegance, using the moment to study Xi's face over the rim. His expression remained impassive, but she could sense the intensity behind his calm exterior. This wasn't small talk, this was the opening gambit in a much larger game. The Silk Road, she said, setting down the cup with deliberate precision. In France, we call that economic colonialism, disguised as cooperation. Your investments aren't generosity, President Xi. They're strategy in its purest form. Xi's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his cup, but his voice remained steady. Ask the Greeks about our investments. They're quite satisfied with Chinese partnership. The port of Piraeus is now Europe's gateway, a symbol of shared prosperity. Our ships bring goods, create jobs, build futures. The port of Piraeus belongs to China now. Marine shot back, her voice rising slightly with controlled anger. Greece's sovereignty exists only on paper. In reality, it's governed from Beijing. 67% ownership isn't partnership. It's a takeover dressed in diplomatic language. Outside the lounge's floor-to-ceiling windows, the storm continued to rage, snow swirling in hypnotic patterns against the glass. The terminal's usual bustle had been replaced by an almost apocalyptic quiet, as if the world itself had paused to listen to their conversation. But Xi had done his homework on Marine Le Pen. He had studied her speeches, analyzed her reactions to pressure, identified the psychological pressure points that had been mapped by Chinese intelligence services for exactly this kind of encounter. The concept of sovereignty is evolving, Madame Le Pen, he said with the patient tone of a professor correcting a student. In the 21st century, no nation can stand alone. Interdependence is reality. Even the United States depends on our supply chains. Even France imports our technology, our rare earth minerals, our manufacturing capacity. Dependence is different from partnership, Marine emphasized, her blue eyes flashing with barely contained fury. What you're offering isn't cooperation, it's modern vassalage. First you loan money at attractive rates, then when repayment becomes impossible, you seize strategic assets in exchange for debt forgiveness. Sri Lanka, Pakistan, half of Africa, the same pattern repeated across the globe. Xi leaned forward slightly, his hands folded before him, in a gesture meant to project reasonableness. The movement brought him into the warm circle of light from the table lamp, emphasizing the weathered lines around his eyes that spoke of decades navigating China's brutal political hierarchy. Why such hostility? Why do you fear China so intensely? We're not your enemies. We offer opportunities that your traditional allies cannot or will not provide. The question struck exactly the nerve Xi intended. His intelligence briefings had identified Marine's sensitivity to accusations of xenophobia, a vulnerability that weakened her politically among moderate voters she needed to win national elections. We propose a multipolar world, he continued, pressing his advantage. An end to American hegemony. Isn't that what you want? European independence from Washington's dictates?